Good morning and welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. My name is Kelly Vlahos and I am the editor-in-chief of Responsible Statecraft, and I'm here also with my producer, Chris Leonard, in the back end. Before we go any further, if you're watching and you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and like. We're trying to build our audience and beat the algorithm. So let's get started. This is an exciting episode for me today. I am joined by my husband, Michael Vlahos. Michael is a writer and author of the book Fighting Identity, Sacred War, and World Change. Over several decades, Michael has taught war and strategy at Johns Hopkins University, the Naval War College, and can be heard every Friday and Sunday night on the John Batchelor Show. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me, ma'am.
So great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. You and I have been talking offline quite a bit about the developments in the Iran war, and lots happened in the last several days in regards to negotiations. Trump has seemingly taken a 180-degree turn, signing a memorandum of understanding with Iran to halt the fighting, open up the Strait of Hormuz, and settle in for talks over the next 60 days, after which his administration hopes to have settled on a permanent agreement over Iran's nuclear program and opening up the strait for good. Lots of obstacles in the way, not the least of which are the politicians on both sides of the aisle that are calling this deal a surrender and a defeat. Let's go to cut one, Chris.
What was your immediate reaction to reading this 14-point plan?
Well, it's a huge disappointment. It constitutes a real defeat for the United States. We had substantial military success, although it's still not clear what President Trump's objective was. But after that success, we've now found ourselves in a trap, basically, of Trump's own making because of the Iranian effort to close the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think this is the right answer. I think it kicks a lot of the big issues like the nuclear program, the ballistic missile and drone programs down the road, and it's not at all clear that it even opens the Strait of Hormuz in a coherent way. We'll have to see. But this is a very ill-advised agreement from a strategic point of view. It may benefit Trump politically at home, but long-range implications internationally are all bad.
Mike, we've talked a bit about how these complaints, which also include Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer saying that this is not the art of the deal, but the art of surrender, and anyone who bought Trump's book, Art of the Deal, should ask for their money back, how they completely missed the mark of history, that sometimes defeat is good for a nation, that they should embrace a defeat. What do you mean by that when you say embrace a defeat?
Well, those who guide our strategy and policy have forgotten that strategic objectives and the objective of all strategy should be success. In other words, achieving that which you want or so earnestly desire. And it is that is the goal, and that is the lodestar of strategy, not a military victory. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, everything in American strategic thought, and that includes all policy activity, is focused on winning a military operation. And the benchmarks of success are military victory. And in some ways, we've ignored success. I mean, just to give the most obvious recent example, we were defeated in Afghanistan, but no one denies that we achieved some form of success by getting ourselves out of that place. And it's that kind of calculus that is critical. Why do you have military forces? To help you achieve your strategic objectives. Well, what are your strategic objectives? We have everything backwards. you have the military to achieve victory, and victory is understood as your strategic objective, and it's not. We had victory in Iraq, and it turned into a debacle. Same with Afghanistan in 2002. The defeats are only defeats if they destroy your strategic objective. And in this case, the war with Iran has allowed the U.S. to escape its greatest strategic liability, which is having its strategy and policy controlled by another country. The country that, in fact, led us into this war, that cajoled and pushed, even coerced us through all of the levers that were available to it, and forced us into this conflict. And it has been terrible. And that only highlights a problem that's existed since since the late 90s, when this Committee for a New American Century put together a paper that essentially implicitly defined the goal of all U.S. policy to ensure that Israel achieved its strategic goals. And that, of course, was triumphantly visible after 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq. And it's still dominant, and it's a terrible liability. It's also a liability in terms of Russia, where the U.S. allowed another country, Ukraine, to essentially pull us into a war with Russia. And the war itself was a bad idea. And so let me look at a couple historical examples, if I might. The first, in terms of embracing defeat, is what happened to Japan in World War II. At the end of World War II, Japan looked absolutely crushed. But looked at from a different angle, suddenly, because of the outcome of the war, the terrible war that had killed 5% of the population of Japan in the last year of the war, suddenly Japan was free of the strategic dilemma that had been crushing it since Japan was, quote unquote, opened in the 1850s and 60s. In other words, opened up to the world from its former isolation. Japan was surrounded by potential enemies that could dominate and tear the nation apart. Britain, the United States, Russia, and eventually, when it came back as a viable country, China. And so Japan was faced with this impossible ring of potential enemies. And they decided war was the only answer. And of course, that war was a terrible mistake in the eyes of most historians. And yet that war and their decision to go to war broke the strategic logjam. It freed Japan of this impossible security dilemma by essentially forging a bond with the United States that has been the locus of their national enterprise since 1945, and it has protected them and given them the scope to be themselves under the umbrella of American security protection and a security partnership. And no one would have thought that to be the case in the wreckage of Japan in 1945, but somehow Japanese leadership had the understanding that the only way ahead for them was to embrace the defeat and turn it into a strategic success. This is the counterintuitive pathway that strategy takes. So, I mean, I have some other examples, but
let me just ask you, just to clarify for the audience, what you're saying is that the strategic success would be finally extricating U.S. foreign policy from Israel's agenda and their own foreign policy, that the results of the defeat, in a sense, the failures of the U.S. war in Iran, is that we have a new future foreign policy policy that is not cleaved so hard to another nations?
Yes, that's one half of it. The other half is that it allows us to open up a channel for a relationship, a productive relationship with Iran.
Yeah.
Why would we want that? Well, if we have a good relationship with Iran, as we do with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, and they can achieve a modus vivendi that offers stability for that region, then we don't have to be there, because being there is a drain. And worse than that, being there in the form of our huge architecture of bases and investments has been focused on helping Israel achieve its goals, which are really inimical to a stable order in the Middle East. So we've been forced, in a sense, to hitch our wagon to a falling star, if you can handle that mixed metaphor. You have to break the logjam. I mean, Nixon did this with China. He went to China, and everyone remembers that he went to China and how great that was. They remember how great it was in retrospect. At the time he went to China, we were completely embroiled in Southeast Asia in basically a regional war, which included Laos and Cambodia and other partners, et cetera, et cetera. And what people either forget or don't know is that we were at war with China. China had 9 railroad divisions in North Vietnam. And our bombing campaign killed 5,000 and perhaps more Chinese PLA soldiers. I mean, that's not nothing. That's comparable, probably more than what Iran has lost in terms of military manpower in this short war. But China was ready to accept a total 180 with the U.S. and not only stop being an enemy, but having an accord. And it was one of the great strategic triumphs of American diplomacy. And in many ways, it put the Soviet Union on the back foot suddenly, because its greatest it was no longer a partner, that is to say China, but it was the other great communist power, and represented with Russia nearly the whole of Eurasia, and it was a huge loss for the Soviet Union. Suddenly they felt encircled, which they were, and that motivated Brezhnev to reach out to Nixon and to improve the U.S. relationship with the Soviet Union. And it was a tremendous achievement, but to many people on the right, it looked like a craven submission to China, and we were embracing these evil commies. And well, yes,
Yeah.
we were. And but this is just by way of illustrating how military victory on the battlefield is not the best measure of strategic success. And the second part of that, of course, is that if you are defeated on the battlefield, that doesn't foreclose your strategic options. It doesn't deny you the opportunity to recover strategically, and indeed to turn a defeat into a victory. And it's happened again and again in history, where you have a very adroit, perceptive national leadership that understands that what we really want is the thing that may not be the most visible.
Yeah.
And in this case, we want to get rid of the severe liability that Israel represents in American national security.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely get what you're saying. It looks like there are going to be some obstacles to that, because we have people within our security establishment who are in complete denial, and it's going to be difficult convincing them. I want to go to cut 2, Chris, if we could.
Let's try this. Let's try a diplomatic solution. I think it's going to fail. What happens next? I spent 4.5 hours with President Trump Friday. Here's what I think will happen next. If this deal fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over by force. The United States will control the Strait of Hormuz. We'll charge a fee for all those who go through to pay for the operation. And we're going to expand the Abraham Accords in calendar year 2026. We're going to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, and which is the biggest change in 5,000 years in the Mideast. And if Iran contests control of the Strait of Hormuz by the United States, we'll obliterate them.
Yeah.
Well,
And
first of all, I can only tip my hat to Mr. Trump. Any man, any person who could find it within themselves to spend 4.5 hours with Lindsey Graham is a titan, a
yeah,
person of nobility beyond compare. But Lindsey Graham is performing a useful service if we can see what he's doing. He is informing us that the problem the U.S. faces strategically is not out there, it's in here. The problem is the strategic mindset of the U.S., which gripped the ruling establishment after the fall of the Soviet Union. And basically it said there's only one way ahead, where America dominates the world, and the strategic problem is to make sure everyone bends at the knee. And
right.
so American, not policy and strategy, the entire American mindset about how it relates to the world and all of humanity was one of a coercion, enforcement, and punishment. That's the way the U.S. has behaved since 1991. And that is not what brought the U.S. success in World War II. And ultimately, we can see how it brought the U.S. strategic failure in Reconstruction after the end of the American Civil War. Punitive relations with the rest of the world that demand that the rest of the world accept us as the patron and that they are all clients has not worked out, and it is destroying the U.S., especially because the U.S. has tied itself to an intensely aggressive small state that has the same mindset, and yet they're willing to act on it constantly, and it is destroying America's viability as a country that can create and sustain trustworthy, positive and beneficial relations with other countries. And the stark comparison there, of course, is with China, which has done a much more capable job of reaching out to other countries, not forcing them to do things, not pressuring them, not demanding that they bend the knee, but rather giving them things, whether or not that is altruistic and whether or not there are big loans to be paid back. Nonetheless, China has forged a pathway where it is heavily engaged in the world. It is not restrained. It's simply not punitive and bullying.
Ideological.
So, Quincy has made its beacon the concept of restraint. And I think that restraint of a bad policy is a good first step, but the truly essential path ahead is not restraint but transformation. The U.S. needs to rediscover the vision of its relation to the rest of the world through the lens, say, of Washington's farewell address. It's not a question of being restrained, it's a question of not being punitive, not being a punisher, not being Judge Dredd to the rest of the world. And the fact that the entire Washington establishment can't see that, or refuses to see it because they have so embraced the aggressive martial approach to all problems, without understanding that this kind of militarism, and it goes well beyond militarism. It's really a kind of Roman imperial idea. But I have to say, even here, the Romans were far more pragmatic and practical with their relations with so-called enemies. But our foreign policy is based on creating enemies so that they can be dealt with by military force in order to sustain this existential postulate that all good strategy is based on military victory. And we have to get out of that somehow.
Well, the worst part of this is that there are members of this national security establishment that you speak of who are so cleaved to Israel that they can't see their way through to the type of long-term strategy that you're talking about. And I just want to get to one last cut, Chris, cut 3 with H.R. McMaster.
I think what we have to keep reminding ourselves of is that there will be no enduring peace with Iran. There will be no enduring peace in the region associated with these proxies, which you've covered just so well in the previous report. And there will be no safety for the Iranian people until there's a fundamental change in the nature of the Iranian government, such that it rejects kind of this revolutionary ideology, and what is associated with it is this sort of permanent hostility to the United States, Israel, and its Arab neighbors. And this forward defense, they call it, is really a forward offense in which they want to keep the Arab world weak by keeping it perpetually enmeshed in conflict with these sectarian civil wars, and then extend hegemonic influence to the Mediterranean. And as your Lebanese analyst just mentioned, surround Israel with a ring of fire, destroy Israel, and kill all the Jews. I mean, that's really what they want to do.
So,
Again,
well, I just want to remind the viewers that H.R. McMaster is now a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which was launched after 9/11 to service the Israel agenda in the United States. So, when you hear him speak, he's speaking for Israel in terms of what their interests are vis-a-vis U.S. foreign policy. So I just wanted to remind folks that he's no longer just a former general or a former national security official for the American government and the Trump administration. He's actually servicing another agenda, but yet he is called upon by mainstream media to pontificate on U.S. war strategy. So go ahead, Michael.
Well, again, this is a very clear presentation that tells us everything we need to know about the mindset that I've been referring to. He's engaged in that peroration in a kind of cultural projection. He is describing America when he is attempting to describe Iran.
That's right.
That's the way we are. And this is how supporters of Israel, I use the word supporters in quotes, of course, supporters of Israel can reassure themselves that they're still on the right and true path because they believe that we live in a world of good and evil, and that evil must be destroyed. And in order to have the good properly nurtured and for everyone to be properly converted in the end, all evil must be punished and ultimately destroyed. And this, of course, is the Israeli approach too. The only difference between the Israeli approach and the American is that the Israelis are not universalistic, they're particularistic, whereas Americans maintain that they have a vision for all mankind. But they believe that this is the right path. And a long article I wrote, which is available online, it has the title, "The Demon in American Sacred Narrative." And from much of American history, but particularly in the 20th century, the idea that there was a great Manichaean struggle and that only the U.S. could vanquish evil, and that after evil was vanquished, there would be the millennium, very much a religious framework, is driven by truly a kind of demon within us that pushes us to forcibly convert those who do not follow us and who do not bend the knee. And this is increasingly clear to the world as a whole, and it is destroying us literally as a country. And the pathway has to be away from that, and the only way to get there is to look back at the sources of this American religion and understand that that was not what the founders intended. And as we approach the millennial observation of American independence, we should look at the farewell address and look at what Washington gave for us, which was a very different vision. And it was not a messianic missionary at the tip of a spear or bayonet mission. It was a very different notion, a vision, really, of how America should connect with the rest of the world. And there has to be some way in which we can see that again. And finally, we have the potential to free ourselves now, because it's a great gift that Israel has finally shown itself in terms of its complicity in this war, and shown itself to be a rogue actor in the world. And it gives us the opportunity to pull away from that. And by reaching out to Iran, most people forget that coercing Iran and trying to bring it to its knees is not the best strategy. The best strategy is to connect with them, give them things, elevate them to the extent that they can see themselves as equals, and then they will be dependent on the U.S. to maintain its mediative capability to continue good relations. And as they make money and prosper, they're going to want to have the U.S. there. They are engaged in war in large part because of Israel. And if that is removed, and if the U.S. becomes the indispensable actor to maintaining regional stability, as opposed to the opposite, which is what we've been doing for the last several decades, we'll have a fruitful relationship, and that will be strategically useful in the sense that it will pull them away from becoming a satrapy, as it were. Again, that's ironic, talking about Persia, but a satrapy of China. And so we have to think in larger terms, and unfortunately, we're not. We, meaning the ruling establishment.
Yeah. Are we experiencing the twilight of American empire today?
Hopefully. American empire it has been an albatross around our neck, and the albatross has very recently taken the highly useful form of Israel itself, and useful because it shows us what's become of us and how corrupted we've become. And we need to understand that maintaining American empire is not only not possible, but it will bring us eventually to our knees. The best pathway, the only pathway to American renewal, is to return to the virtue and vision of Washington, and that of a altruistic republic, but altruism in a completely different way from the kind of a domineering approach we've taken since 1991.
Do you think what J.D. Vance is doing now, engaging in the diplomacy that we had hoped for many months, the kind of talk that Trump is engaging in and telling Israel to back off, do you think they finally get it? Or do you think that they are just responding to the reality that if they don't stop this war, the American economy is going to tank, and there is going to be an enormous backlash politically for them ahead of the midterms? What is your sense about the primary actors here, the Trump administration, and whether or not that they can see this through, this being the Iran agreement, and be able to deflect and disconnect from the stranglehold that Israel had on the policy up until now.
Again, to use a biblical reference, the handwriting is on the wall. Everyone can see it, and it's glowing just the way it does in all those Renaissance paintings. And there's no escaping that. But there's still people like Lindsey Graham and many others who would walk us over the precipice, who believe that a kind of Armageddon is necessary. And there are lots in Israel who feel the same way. And Armageddon is the end. It is not something to wish for. So I hope there's enough of strength, and Mr. Vance certainly seems to want to follow that path, and his own personal provenance would strongly suggest that he isn't part of this death march imperial mindset that dominates Washington. But as to whether he'll succeed or not is another issue. There isn't very much time, and so I think there's an urgency within the White House, and the question is really one of how to implement this. And so one final point I should make in this whole idea of embracing defeat is if you're embracing what looks like a defeat but actually is a way out, if you're embracing that path as your strategic course, you have to do it with what the French would call éclat. You have to look confident and successful. You have to look like this is your choice, and this is the best way. And what we're doing is in the best interest, not just of the United States, but Iran and the Gulf, but even Israel, because it gets them out of the death march they've been on. And I don't see Mr. Trump ready to embrace that. I don't think he would know how to do that. And that is why looking at Nixon in China is such a revelation, because Nixon went there with a complete sense of savoir-faire and masterfulness, and he really looked all the equal of the Chinese greats like Mao and Zhou Enlai, who'd been around, since the end of World War II, and here he was as their equals, and it was refreshing because his strength made Americans feel not only that we were strong and undiminished by the war in Vietnam, but also that we were in capable hands, that we were heading in the right direction. And Mr. Trump could do that. I just don't know if he has the people around him and if he is personally able to understand that how he behaves is one of the critical ingredients to this being ultimately a success.
I want to ask you before we go something that's sort of dogged at me for a while now, and since you are a military strategist, I need to know, how is it that a military with all of its prowess, wealth, capabilities was unable to best what is clearly a bottom tier, or not bottom tier, but a mid-level military like Iran, and how Iran was able to drag us to the point where we have a 14-point memorandum in which it looks like the United States is giving Iran a lot just to end the fighting. How did that happen?
Well, there are two cults within the American military that have dominated the American military since 1890. One is sea power, which began in 1890, and the second is air power, which began really during World War I and its aftermath. And these are Deus ex machina cults. They believe that the divine instrument of sea power or the divine instrument of air power will defeat any enemy. And they're mesmerized by the vision of power that they emanate, which is a technology vision, which is magical in the sense that this technology has, like a fetish, has inner power, magical power that will allow us to find victory always. And unfortunately, the Desert Storm experience only reinforced that idea, and it's an idée fixe, and it's not real. It's essentially ceremonial. It can inflict a lot of damage. It has a lot of power in the sense that it can destroy things, big things, but that isn't the same as defeating a nation. And we have forgotten that, and we've forgotten that each time we've been defeated by it. We were defeated by it in Vietnam, and then we were defeated by it in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it doesn't matter because we killed our way out of it when we destroyed ISIS. So we killed 40,000 plus fighters and all of their extended families, by the way. And they just went away, but they're back now. And that's the whole point. It isn't decisive, and yet it believes, like a devout religionist would believe, that it will continue to work. The belief overcomes the record of reality, and this is an enormous problem for the United States. And you know, when China develops a huge navy bigger than ours, they do it simply for ceremonial purposes, to impress the rest of the world and to impress the United States.
Yeah.
But we, fools that we are, actually believe that this magical technology will bring victory. And the greatest blessing of this war and the earlier 12-day war a year ago, or however long it was, is that it is exposed the falseness of this vision, the absolute emptiness of it. And we should then, you know, draw back in horror and say, oh my God, what have we done? Let's do something different. I will bet that that's not going to happen, because I look every day at defense projects and they're still going down this pathway of the perfect, precious weapon.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, the lesson that they're drawing is they need more money for drone swarms, and more sophisticated AI directed weapons, and that
The drones will get bigger and more beautiful and more bejeweled, and then the drones millions each, and yeah, of course.
yeah. Well,
What you also have the problem, just to conclude, is that these weapons are enormously expensive, and the more expensive they are, the more you treasure them. And then, of course, everything is about the appropriations, the money that you get to spend on them. And it's the military has become a completely financialized operation. Like the rest of the American economy, it doesn't actually have the ability to make things the way it used to, mass produce, mobilize, do all the things that, say, the U.S. did in World War II. What it's capable of doing is building these extravagant, beautiful, at least in the eyes of the beholder, weapons like the F-35 that cost hundreds of millions, and yet that's the thing. Oh, what did Plato call it? That's the thing itself. That's the essence of who they are and what they live for, and separating them from that.
right. And as we're finding out, they're not absolutely necessary in these modern wars. their capabilities. So
You have
that's
a
a
barefoot
$2 trillion weapon, or a $2 trillion lesson that we had to learn. And we're now moving on to the F-47 and other dream projects and capabilities. And yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's unfortunate that we probably will learn the wrong lessons from this war, but we'll keep having people like you out there talking, speaking truth to power. And I really appreciate having you on. Great to see you on my show, and hope you will come back. And for all you listening, please, we're not only on YouTube, but on Substack, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Apple Pod. So if you're listening on any of those vectors, please give us a good review, subscribe, like us, so we can reach more folks with Trip the Beltway. Fantastic. And we'll see you next week. And thank you, Chris, for your wonderful production.